Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. This is our third to the last week. What I'm going to do today is actually I'm going to be focusing, as I mentioned last week, on Generation Z, and I'm going to put that in the context of looking at the value of social recognition, which is one of the things that a number of sociologists say that generation values a lot. So I'm going to be explaining that in a little bit. Before I get started with that, I want to just briefly say a couple things about the presidential election and kind of the post-election going on. This is not meant to be comprehensive in any way. There's a fair amount of the symbolic struggle goes on, and I'm trying to give you some information that will help you decode that a little bit. So the first thing is, what does the presidential vote look like at this time? At this time, which I'm doing this lecture on Tuesday morning on November 12th, it looks like Trump is going to win the popular vote by 1.5 percentage points. This is, I think you all know, this will be the first time he won the popular vote. The last time that he won the election, he won the Electoral College, but he actually lost the popular vote by 2 percentage points. Um, he is, it's almost certain, I would say, that he's going to win the popular vote. He's also going to garner just under 50% of the popular vote. The reason why, how is it that he can win but not get half of the popular vote? I think he's going to be very close, by the way, like maybe 49.8 or 49.9. It's possible he'll get to 50. We don't know. There's still a lot of votes being counted, especially in California. When Californians go a little more than, I think they go in the neighborhood of close, I'll put it this way, close to 2 to 1 or 3 out of 5, somewhere in that neighborhood towards Harris. Anyhow, he's going to get just a little under 50% of the popular vote because of the third and fourth party candidates that even with this very close race, where everybody understands it's a close race, they about 1.5%, somewhere around there, said, "Look, I just can't vote for either one of them." Uh, in addition, it also looks like the voter eligible turnout rates are going to be down a little bit from 2020, which was at a higher level. Their turnout rate was higher in 2020 than it had been in quite a while. So it's going to come down some. What they mean by the voter eligible turnout rate is that they take all the people who might vote, not just those that are registered, all those people that are eligible to vote, and they tell you what that percentage is. And it looks like it's going to be around 65%. I'll be, we'll know a little more about that by the end of the term, and if I see something that looks like a really clear number, I'll let you know. But at any rate, the turnout rate's down just a little bit. If we look at the 1.5 percentage point, a good way to think about this is that it constitutes a swing of 3 percentage points from Biden, who won by around, Biden won by around a little under, I think a little under 4.5 in 2020. So if you add 1.5 to 4.5 and you say, okay, if 3% of the people move from one to the other, that's how you would get that, that's that 1.5% lead for Trump. So that's a substantial swing. It's pretty far from, a kind of a landslide. It's a good way, just as a comparison, is to go back and look at how in 2016, even though Clinton lost, she actually won a more of the popular vote, a more had a bigger gap between Clinton and Trump in the popular vote in 2016. Um, Now, the next thing I want to say is that taking the early post-election discourse with a cup of salt, with a good amount of skepticism, and realizing that a lot of things people are saying are politically motivated and likely to change when we have better information. Doesn't mean that everything they're saying is wrong, but I think it's we should be cautious about the interpretations now. The first thing I want to say with regard to this is to remind you that we have a secret ballot. So it's not easy to know how people actually voted. And we've talked before about how surveys have problems with accuracy, and that the accuracy of polling has declined over time because it's so hard to reach certain kinds of people. Um, the way in which a lot of the information you're hearing, things like Trump did a lot better with Latinos, Trump did a lot better with young voters and things like that, they may turn out to be true. But it's also the case that the exit polls, this is what they're relying on, are not finished yet. There's a lot of work to be done before they finish those exit polls. And actually, exit polls themselves are often inaccurate, and that the inaccuracies are especially strong or likely when estimating the votes of African American, Latino, and young voters. In addition, when you hear people saying, Biden did badly with, excuse me, Harris did badly with this person, this group of people, or Trump did super well with that group of people, they're oftentimes cherry picking results, and that those are results that may turn out to be inaccurate. So I look at all this stuff with a lot of skepticism. I think one of the things that we can see is that in a lot of different counties, in a lot of different locations, Trump did a little better than he did last time. And keep in mind, we're only talking about a 3 percentage point swing. I'm not trying to minimize that. That's substantial. But it can't be that Trump did super well with with all these different groups. I think it's more a matter of the relatively small changes with some important groups. That's what I think is likely to end up explaining that swing of 3 percentage points. Another way of saying all of this is that framing, or maybe a more pejorative way of saying this, is that spinning results abound. One of the things to keep in mind, we talked about symbolic power and symbolic struggle. The symbolic battle, it never ends, okay? Now the positioning and the focus is a little different, but it's ongoing. The symbolic battle shifts to winners asserting a mandate, which has the risk of overreach. I hope we'll get a chance to talk about that in the future. And losers making sense of the loss, sometimes risking destructive internal battles. Let me say just a little bit more about this. Winners tend to, there's nothing unique about Trump. He may go a little further than some, but winners tend to exaggerate the magnitude of their victory, and to assert a mandate that everything that they said is they have a mandate to carry out. Um, we don't actually know how popular certain things will be as they work to implement them. Uh, an example of this kind of exaggeration, I give you just an example, not trying to pick on, I can't even remember who it was, it might have been Fox News, but you can see the title here, Democrats Reel from Trump's Surprising Landslide Victory. Well, it's not a landslide victory, okay, but that's the kind of exaggeration you're going to see a lot of. I think it's also important to recognize, and this is, I'm recognizing this as an objective fact, that Trump never really explained to people how the mass deportation is going to work. And in addition, he clearly, I think almost everybody would agree that he misrepresented the tariffs, saying that he's going to make the Chinese pay for them and things like that that were just inaccurate. And so when he actually goes, taking those as the two main things that he's going to work on, working to deport 11 million undocumented people and having across the board tariffs, it's not clear whether he's going to have full support for that, even for those, even in his own party. And so we're going to have to see how this goes, how this happens. And these are some really important questions for you to be looking at with critical thinking, whether you're a Trump supporter or not, right? I encourage you to look at these important issues as accurately as possible. In in this regard, I want to mention what I consider, this is my opinion, an important conservative voice that has for a number of years now worked to develop a vision around the Trump coalition and looking to the future, maybe even more past Trump, looking on, how can we make this new coalition, which is increasingly becoming the non-college educated white and non-white people, or white and racial minorities, as is American Compass. And I encourage you to take a look at that. And I'm going to be sprinkling in some of their views in this lecture, and possibly in the future. I think that they're articulating a post neoliberal vision of conservatism that runs against establishment republicanism and aligns with their new working class coalition. And so I ask you to, if you're interested in politics, to consider engaging their ideas. The losing side, the Democrats, has a coalition of groups with divergent interests. All political parties are coalitions of different groups. It's possible. Some people have argued sometimes that the Democrats are more of a coalition of divergent groups than some parties. I don't personally agree with that, but that is an argument that's out there. Some of these groups or their representatives will frame the loss as a failure to address their key constituency. I give an example down there of how Bernie Sanders has said, we lost because the Democrats have abandoned the working class, right? So he's an economic populist, Bernie Sanders is, and so that's the kind of critique he's going to be making. What he takes to be a key constituency in the Democratic Party, and historically this has been a key constituency, although as we've noted several times in the class, it's been eroding, that he's saying that this is why we lost, that we've abandoned the working classes. Or they may be say that we're overemphasizing some other constituency. That the flip side of this could be that the Democrats are focusing more on the political beliefs and ideology of the college educated classes. I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to. I think I've linked a couple that I think it would be really good for you to read if you have the time. But I do think that you should recognize that in most instances, these are beliefs that they already had. Bernie Sanders always has for a long time. That's why he ran for president. Felt that the Democrats needed to develop a much more working class focused party ideology and set of policies. Um, so I think the more important questions that can be learned through the kind of dialogue that goes on. And I'm not saying that again, I'm not saying the dialogue is worthless. I'm just suggesting that you recognize that it's interested, that you're looking at representatives of different constituencies sticking up for their constituencies, almost is one way to put that. Is what can we learn as a party? What can we learn from our loss? And how do we move forward and build a broader coalition that supports policies that we think are important? So that's all I have to say about the election for now. I want to move to talking about Generation Z. And I'm not trying to do some kind of comprehensive understanding of the politics of Generation Z. In fact, I'm going to step back just slightly from politics to look at a broader sociological analysis of Generation Z and the context that they're in, and and some of the what are clear differences between Generation Z and what direction they may be taking us. And so what I'm going to have you do is you're going to read two chapters, but I'm going to focus the lecture just on this one. And I'm going to encourage you to read the chapter from Fight, How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America, but only going to be focusing the lecture on Lamont's Seeing Others, How Recognition Works and How It Can Heal a Divided World. You can see how she's trying to address our polarization. And specifically, you're reading a chapter near the end of the book that's titled The Next Generation, How Gen Z Fights for the Future. If you, this is a relatively easy sociology book to read. If you find this interesting, I strongly encourage you to pick up the book. Maybe even ask the library to get a copy of it. I don't know why we don't have a copy of it. I guess they're short on money now. But at any rate, this is what what I'm going to do in the remaining part of the lecture is to just try to give you the framework that Michelle is working on as she, sort of sets up, that gives you the good context for understanding, hopefully to increase your understanding of this chapter 7. Now, the overarching thing that I'm going to be focusing on in the remainder of this lecture is the value of recognition. So she's arguing that we as a society need to focus more on recognition, and we need to expand our scales of recognition, or the ways ways we recognize the worth of all of us. And so what I'm going to do is put this in the context, and I'll be explaining what she means by recognition and things like that. The first thing to say is that the broader context is that she's talking about what sociologists have referred to as redistribution and recognition, that there are sort of two important dynamics in terms of creating a good society. In the kind of society that we're in now, where neoliberal capitalism has gone to a very great extent, created a lot of economic inequality, a lot of cultural and political polarization. And one solution to this, and it's been the solution that she argues that is an important one, but has been focused on to the exclusion of recognition, is focusing on redistribution. And I think most of you have a good sense of that already, so I'm going to be talking about it a little bit and then focus more on what she has to say about recognition. The idea or the ideal of a society that has adequate redistribution, especially in this advanced neoliberal condition that we're coming out of now, is that redistribution is an ethic and politics of redistribution that recognizes or argues that the current economic system concentrates wealth in economic elites and the creative classes, these highly educated upper middle classes that have advanced educations. And that this economic system, however, it gets conceptualized different ways, whether you're on the left or the right, and there's differences between the left and the right. But there's a growing consensus on the left and the right that this is unfair to a lot of people. It's leaving them insecure, isolated, unable to form strong families, physically and spiritually worn out, scrambling to get by, and in the the saddest of cases, people that are destitute and dispirited. So redistribution is saying we have to fix this economic system to change the way it may be super productive. It's creating lots of great new technologies and whatnot, but it's concentrating wealth too much and it's harming too many people. This is a growing consensus on the left and the right. So the question becomes, when you're focusing on redistribution, how do we create a political economy that affords an opportunity for all people to thrive economically? Or how do we use politics to redistribute wealth to increase opportunity? These are the kinds of questions. How you frame these differs a little, whether you're on the left and the right. And, I'm actually not trying to tease that out in this lecture here. In fact, if you look at this list of things, some of these things are things that would be focused more on the left, but a number of them are things that are focused on the right. They're all working to create a political economy, a combination of the politics and the economic order that's going to afford an opportunity for all people to thrive. So these include things like progressive income taxes, wealth taxes, universal education, extending it to preschool and post-high school education, whether that's college or technical degrees, technical training, paid family and medical leave, child tax credits, universal health care, more opportunities for recreation so people can maintain their health, to have everybody needs recreation, whether that's physical activity or mental recovery from hard work and things like that. Legislation strengthening and reforming unions, right to work laws, making it so everybody who's able-bodied has a right to work, and that when the market is not making this available, the government steps in and hires unemployed people to do things like rebuild infrastructure, care for the sick and the elderly, and things like that. And then also industrial policy that incentivizes economic investment in depressed areas, whether those are in low income urban areas or rural areas, small towns and that have been deindustrialized. Um, Within the context of industrial policy on both the left and the right, for people who are critiquing this neoliberal order that we're moving away from, the tariffs can be a part of this. However, there's broad recognition on the left and the right. Trump did not want to recognize this politically because he in general, politicians don't recognize the negative side of their policies. They want to only emphasize the positive side. But the reality is that tariffs are regressive taxes that hit exporters like in the United States, like farmers, and poor and lower middle classes the most. They're taxes. They make everything that you put a tariff cost more. And you read earlier where Orrin Cass said, well, that might only be for a while, but there's a lot of evidence that it just increases the prices of things. Even after that may lead to reshoring, because labor costs are going to be higher, and if you're really concerned about economic inequality, you want the labor costs to be higher. So at any rate, it's not my point is not to say that tariffs are terrible. I'm just saying that they are regressive taxes that hurt the poor and the lower middle classes the most. And so if you're going to rely on tariffs, they need to be balanced with tax credits or subsidies for those who are hit the hardest. Now, I've previously talked about the neoliberal ideology at some length. You probably got tired of me talking about it, so I won't spend too much time here. I just want to revisit this and remind you of some of the things that we talked about. These are, I'm not breaking new ground here, but I think we need to bring this back into the current context. I previously talked about how the neoliberal ideology, which many people label market fundamentalism. And you can see there that I've linked a discussion by American Compass on market fundamentalism. And I put that there because a lot of times people think the critique of neoliberal ideology only comes from the liberal or the left side, but actually it's increasingly coming from conservatives. So this is what you could do if you go there. You'll see a conservative critique of market fundamentalism. And if you read it carefully and look at some other things, this is taking you to that American Compass. You'll see that there's actually a considerable amount of overlap between the conservative and the progressive critiques of market fundamentalism. At any rate, we talked about how the neoliberal ideology became dominant in both parties, that it captured, it was initiated by Reagan, or maybe a better way of saying that the Reagan victory in 1980 was was a big step in the ascendance of neoliberal ideology, but it captured the Democratic Party. And you can see this most clearly through the presidency of Bill Clinton. I'm not saying that all neoliberals are alike, but both Democrats, the dominant ideology in both the Democratic and the Republican parties by the late 1980s was neoliberalism. The neoliberals value economic freedom and individual liberty over equality and solidarity. They want small, limited market. They have a tremendous faith in free markets and free trade. That's where you get that idea of fundamentalism. A fundamentalism who thinks is someone who thinks that this is the only way to solve problems, and that's really the case in the true, pure, more pure free marketeers, the market fundamentalists. So there's this strong faith in free markets and free trade, which contributed to and justified rapid economic globalization and financialization. Financialization is where there's increasing power and profitability of banks, insurance companies, and other financial institutions. Um, and there's going back to neoliberalism, there's a great focus on government deregulation and privatization. So people don't trust the government. We're trying to get the government out of the economy and things like that. It also, as we saw, leads to a kind of hyper individualism and a focus on self reliance. So, for example, the market fundamentalists are ideologically opposed to unions of any form because we should all be individuals operating in the market, in the various markets. And that this hyper individualism leads to declining civic culture. It makes it so we retreat into our individual goals and focus on our individual advancement, and because this is how free market world works, it shifts away from focus on civic engagement, that I owe something to my community. I should be involved in my children's school. I should be engaged in the good works that my church or synagogue or mosque does. Those sorts of things. It's leading us in an individualistic direction, and away from different forms of social solidarity. Market fundamentalism, as it became hegemonic, or it became dominant, it led to manufacturing decline, financialization, geographic concentration of economic power in so-called global cities like the San Francisco Bay Area, concentration of economic power in finance and the high-tech sectors, and the growth and expansion of low-paid, casualized service sector jobs where the employer, kind of owes you nothing. There's no commitment to you. They're going to pay you by the hour for as many hours as they want you to work. But that's pretty much it. They're not they don't consider it their concern. It's up to you to figure out how you're going to make ends meet and pay for your kids' college and that kind of thing. And in addition, this led to a situation where the college educated classes gain. A lot of time people talk about the 1%. I actually think I understand why they do that, and it is true that the biggest income and wealth gains have been actually in the top 1,000th or even top 10,000th, not just the top 100th. But the truth is also that the college educated classes, not everybody who graduates from college, but say roughly the top 1/5 has done really well. And many of people who are in the non-college educated classes have lost out and stagnated and are struggling. Now I'm going to bring it back in and begin to talk about social recognition. So I've talked a lot about redistribution and and we talked about how redistribution and recognition are, sort of are two important, uh, you know, developments or functions in our kind of society where we're so divided economically, culturally, and politically. critique of neoliberalism focuses on addressing economic inequality or redistribution. Now I'm speaking more in the voice of Michelle Lamont. She's saying that yes, we need to address redistribution. And I'm adding to that that these critiques are on the left and the right. And I want people, I think going forward, whatever happens in the Trump administration, this is likely to become clearer and clearer. That the critiques of neoliberalism are on the left and the right. One clear way to see, if it's easy to see it on the left, right? That the Bernie Sanderses and that wing of the party really did influence the Biden administration, and that's why they focused on the infrastructure bill and the chips and technology as an industrial policy bill and things like that have really worked at creating more working class jobs and more manufacturing jobs, and that it's likely to, because it's a bill that was passed and it takes effect over time, that's actually likely to have positive benefits for some time. But also, Trump's focus on tariffs is also rooted in an industrial policy that is critical of neoliberalism. So the critiques are on the left and the right. Lamont is saying that, yeah, redistribution's important. She would even say it's very important, but it often misses the importance of social recognition. And a good quote from her, this comes from the first chapter of the book: dignity affects quality of life as much as material conditions do. So you're starting to see what she means by recognition here. It's connected to how we all have value, we all have worth, we all have dignity, right? And she's saying that in the same way that there's an economic shortages and inequalities, there's inequalities in social recognition, and that we can't solve things just by focusing on on economic inequalities. Lamont argues that in order to understand social recognition, it will help to look at narratives of how the world works, which also tell you who is most valued in a society. All societies have what sociologists like her call collective imaginaries that are narratives of how the world works. Other people might call them ideologies, but I think that kind of misses the point. Ideologies makes it seem more like it's political and stuff like that. It's like a liberal ideology or a conservative ideology or Marxist ideology or whatever, right? But this is getting at the way, that we all as humans need to have ways of making sense of the meaning of our lives, and collective imaginaries, which might not be, strictly speaking, exactly true, help organize our lives and give us purpose and give us kind of guides about how to live our lives in some sense. So work with that concept of collective imaginary as you're thinking about her talking about we need to increase and focus more on social recognition. What she argues is that our collective imaginaries have been colonized and dominated by neoliberalism. So neoliberalism didn't just create economic inequality, it sort of took over and becomes dominant in our collective imaginary. And what she would call our collective imaginary, one way of thinking about it is the American dream. Our collective imaginaries have been colonized by neoliberalism, and central to them are a couple of ideas: meritocracy and grit. Meritocracy is this idea that You know, if you work hard, you're going to make it to the top, and you can go, you know, wherever, you know, as far as you can take yourself if you work hard and apply yourself. And so what does that do? It makes it seem like the people at the top are the good people, the moral people, the people who are success and deserve a lot of social recognition. And the people at the bottom, those are the losers, right? So what what she's arguing is that our collective imaginary, that some people might call the American dream, overvalues the winners of economic globalization and turns it into what some people have called winner take all social recognition, where we exalt the winners. They feel good about themselves, that up top 20%, they're feeling really good, they're very competitive, they've got jobs where they have a lot of autonomy, they have money to, you know, to have nice things, and they're economically secure. But it also then stigmatizes the losers, and that this is very dysfunctional in the long run. And so I think what she would say is that this American dream, collective imaginary, while it has positive things about it, she's not saying that we should get rid of meritocracy and a focus on self-reliance or grit. She's saying that we need something more than this. That what we're hearing too much from our collective imaginary is that, you know, how hard you work and your personal resilience determines your economic success and your worth in society. She wants to challenge our, not to throw out. Meritocracy has value, and but we need to challenge and expand our collective imaginary. Now, let me step back and talk about worth and look at that phrase, seeing others, which is, you know, after all, the title of the book. Um, and, uh, and talk a little more about what she means by worth. Because there are some ways that, as sociologists, uh, um, you might interpret it in ways that she wants to encourage us not to. She has a particular understanding of what she means by worth. Worth is, you know, where we see others, we acknowledge people's existence and positive worth, positive value. We actively make them visible and valued, and we reduce their sense of marginalization and openly integrate them into a group. So what she's really talking about is something that can be applied to to people who are stigmatized in stigmatized categories that cross the political boundaries, right? We can think of people that are conservatives or Republicans that are stigmatized, and we can think of people that are liberals and Democrats that are stigmatized. So think about what she's, you know, this is, think about what her idea of worth is as you're kind of going through that chapter. One of the things she says is that worth is not the same thing as social status. Most of you have taken a theory class, and you learned, it's certainly in a theory class, you learned something about Max Weber and his famous essay, Class Status Party. Um, and that's where he centrally focuses on this concept of social status, which is a big concept in sociology. Social status tends to position people in hierarchies. In other words, if you say somebody has high status, they have high status because they're high on some scale of value. They're viewed as competent. Somebody who's highly educated and they're really competent at this, as an accountant or whatever. Or it could be somebody who's competent at diagnosing, engines that won't start and things like that. There can be different kinds of competence, but it's still kind of a hierarchy there. Um, Social status comes to people who have power, so they're more valued. Or especially in our society, in this neoliberal world, wealth. The wealthier you are, the more you have high social status. She's talking about worth, contrasting that to social status. And what she's saying is that we need to expand standards of worth beyond meritocracy and grit. Meritocracy and grit fits those upper middle classes pretty well. It gives them good motivation. It makes them feel like they're self-reliant, and they tend to be fairly individualistic and like autonomy and stuff like that. But we need more than that. We need a collective imaginary that has worth that goes beyond meritocracy and grit. One of the things, and you can read her work, and other people have found very similar things. She did two major studies, one on working class people and one on college educated professionals and managers. And what she found was, when she asked them, the kinds of people that they valued and looked up to and their scale of worth, it tended to be people who were successful, what they defined as successful occupationally, that they had a lot of wealth, that they had, were economically successful, and that they were consumed at a high level, that they had the money for and appreciated luxury, and whether you're talking about cars or kitchens or whatever, they had that high luxury style and a taste for that. When she studied working class people, and I do have to say that she focused on white and African American men, but I think this same pattern shows up in other groups. Working class people often deflect. They, in some way or another, they refuse those scales of worth that the educated professionals and managers have, and instead they value their contributions to their family, how they're there for their family members, helped their parents when they were ill, helped a sibling who got in with the wrong crowd, uh, were important to their community. They worked as little league coaches or were active in their synagogue or mosque, and they were also there for their friends. They also had focused less on, the individual kinds of success and more on their morality, whether they were good people, and they oftentimes tended to value their discipline, that they had the discipline to work at, back-breaking jobs that were hard to show up at, jobs that, somebody had to do, but were oftentimes not as intrinsically rewarding as the kind of jobs that professionals and managers have. Doesn't mean that they didn't see their jobs as valuable, but they did see themselves as needing to have discipline to show up at work, and oftentimes having to work extra jobs in order to make ends meet, and they valued people, including themselves, for having that discipline. So there's a difference here, and in a sense, if you really think about what she's talking about, is that she's arguing that the college educated professionals and managers who have benefited from neoliberalism, this doesn't make them bad people, but they've tended to think that those neoliberal values are the ones that really matter. And they've tended to structure society and to carry out politics that focuses on those kinds of scales of worth. And what in a sense, what she's saying is that we need to expand our standards of worth beyond meritocracy and grit to include the value of contributing to family, community, and and things like that. So we'll look more at that, but that hopefully starts to give you an idea of where she's going with this. So Lamont thinks we need to broaden our scales of worth to be more inclusive of more important social activities. That as we move away from neoliberalism, we need to change and alter and expand, redefine the neoliberal American dream. Whether that would be, to expand and grow the American dream, or have equal, other kinds of collective imaginaries. That could, you could think about it different ways. But the overall thing is that we need to broaden social recognition to include people who are less focused on the rat race, who are less focused on individual achievement, and to not just, have them face the label or the stigma of being a loser or somebody who can't be a good provider, or well, all these different negative labels that have been heaped on people as their communities and their work structures have been degraded. So the kinds of things I'm going to just list and talk a little bit about a few different ways of thinking about this, and encourage you to think more, even more broadly and more creatively. I'm not trying to be in any way exhaustive, just some things to maybe think about in terms of trying to illustrate what she means about expanding or going beyond the neoliberal American dream, and keeping in mind this idea of social recognition as being as important as economic redistribution as we repair ourselves. One sort of idea would be to value moralities of solidarity, of building connection. If you're very individualistic, these kinds of things and these kinds of activities tend to get devalued. A really straightforward one is think about how much we value caring for others. If you have a sick relative, is it set up so that your work allows you to take care of them? How much do people who care for the elderly and care for and engage in childcare, how much money do they make? I'm not trying to reduce things to money, but that kind of tells you a little bit about how much we value them. How much do we value K through 6 teachers compared to say college professors? Not that college professors are valued that much, but there's kind of a weird, it doesn't make sense kind of hierarchy that gets created when you're more on the caring side of things, right? So we need to value moralities of solidarity, altruism, and maybe especially at this time, the people who build connections across social, cultural, and political boundaries. Imagine if we had a society that really recognized and really valued those activities instead of, the way that it works now. When you start to cross boundaries, there's lots of times there's people policing those, either trying to keep you out or people trying to keep you in, right? And so there's a lot of this boundary crossing going on now. But I think as a society, we should value that now. And think about in your own lives, who are the people you know who cross boundaries? And what kind of, excuse the expression, shit do they take sometime for doing that? So that's another thing that I think that she's getting at here. She certainly would want us to think about how we can expand civic and community involvement as a source of recognition, as just as important as, having a good, being successful professionally or whatever that is, right? And as we grow, the value of civic and community involvement and move away from our hyper individualism, it will make trolling that is so common on social media now. It'll make that, although I mean, there's definitely people that are, sort of working to downplay trolling now. I understand that, but there's so much trolling now on social media that as we come to rebuild the civic and community involvement, it'll make them stand out as people who are just tearing things down, right? And so that's I think could be one of the positive things of broadening social recognition in that direction. Beyond that, there should be opportunities for people to receive recognition for all kinds of creativity, whether that's artistic or you know crafts, whatever those are, even if they're not the very best, right? Think about people who put together a band and play at local events and things like that, and how that should be really that should be really super valued, and that there should be genuine social recognition beyond, well, how much money did you make, or how many streams are there, right? We need to, when you have this sort of winner take all society in the culture, among the cultural producers, it makes it so all kinds of other creativity goes under recognized. People cultivating spirituality, very similar. That's also something that has tended to get centralized in mega churches and online churches and things like that. But we should be valuing people in our communities that are cultivating spirituality and sharing their insights and helping us understand and make sense of our lives, as fleeting as they are, right? Educating self and others. People who want to go back and get more education, whatever kind of education that is, that should be viewed as a positive kind of enrichment that is definitely a worthy self project, right? And people who have knowledge that are willing to then share that with others, that should be valued as well, even if it's not in some formal education system. Um, and overall, what I would say is that at this time, we need to value people. If you're really thinking about broadening social recognition, the way that she's talking about it, I think it's really important to value people who are doing the work to repair the social fabric. I talked about people building connections across social, cultural boundaries, but other ways that people are genuinely working to repair the social fabric, to bring us together, to help us recognize our commonalities and things like that. So one of the questions I ask you to do, because I'm well aware, and I know that Lamont is, that these kinds of things are already going on now, right? There's plenty of people who are caring for others, who are engaging in, being a musician as a hobby and things like that. But what I would ask is, how are people being genuinely honored in our broader public, popular, and civic culture, that are stepping outside this individual achievement model? Just think about who the people are that are super valued in our society. The very successful athletes, the super successful superstars and musicians who clawed their way to the top. All this kind of stuff. Not to say again that we're going to throw that away, but as a way of running a society, it creates too much of a shortage of social recognition. Lamont offers the term or the idea ordinary universalism as a way to kind of point towards a way that we can expand recognition for everybody. It doesn't have to be based on something they did. It's more from being. She at one point had in some of her writings talks about going from doing to being. And she wants us to increase recognition for just being. It's not something that you've achieved. Even getting recognition for being a little league coach, that involves you achieving things. And she wants to expand recognition broadly and is arguing that there's a shortage of that. And her idea of ordinary universalism is one way to think about it. And I encourage you to, take the spirit of this and maybe build it in your own directions. What she means by ordinary universalism is recognizing how we are all the same while appreciating and honoring our differences. And that, she would say, that's the trick. The trick is to have a sense of how we're all the same while not erasing our differences. And she came up with the idea of ordinary universalism. She's a qualitative researcher, and she came up with the idea of ordinary universalism when she was talking. I think that she would say that it became most graphic when she was talking to North African immigrants to the Paris suburbs in France, and that one of the things that she found them doing when she was asking them who they valued, what kind of people do they value the most, what kind of the people do they value less, and those kinds of questions, is that they kept coming back to how we're all the same. Recognizing how we're all the same and the kinds of things they said. These are just examples. We all bleed red. We all bleed the same red blood. You may have heard some of these yourselves. We're all children of God. We're all here on this earth for an instant, giving that sense of how we're all very small. Any differences that we make amongst each other, they shouldn't be creating hierarchies. It's the impression I get from that. We all want respect, or we're all put here to look out for each other. We're all here to look out for each other. All these different ways of creating a sense of universalism that she believes does not rub against pluralism, doesn't rub against, and doesn't prevent or stop us from also honoring our differences. And that's, I think, that's something that I think is a real challenge. And if we think about, ways in which we may feel very distant from different groups, this ordinary universalism, if imagine if this was more broadly believed in our society. And if you look at how this is framed, it's not framed as we're all Americans who da 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 da, right? It's very general. We're all children of God, every single one of us. And that then still, that kind of universalism, instead of, you could contrast that with a more narrow universalism where, we're the true Americans and you need to assimilate into us, right? Or you need to recognize that we're the dominant group and become more like us. That's a kind of universalism that retains that sort of dominance. This ordinary universalism is where we're all the same and that we have differences, but in the end, we're all the same. And that allows us to honor those differences, whether they're ethnic, religious, and we can recognize them in a context of recognizing that these differences are in a context of us all being the same. So this idea of ordinary universalism, she believes, is one way to expand, and she thinks it's an important way to expand social recognition. Um, a couple of other things I'm going to say, and there it's more sort of to just mention, and I don't want to detract. I want you to focus more on the article, but I want you to know this broader context for her work in case this is something that you would be interested in. If you're focusing on recognition, then kind of the opposite of social recognition is stigma or shame, and which leads to shame. And we can all think of stigmatized groups we've all experienced, and at least I've never met someone who hasn't been stigmatized at some point. And we know that sting, we know that burn, right? What I think that she does as part of her general project of thinking about social recognition and how to expand it is that she notices and attends to social processes of stigmatization and destigmatization. People who are successfully challenging stigma and reducing that stigma. At a psychological level or a social psychological level, they're dealing with shame and how to manage and counter that shame, how to be able to displace it, how to be able to weaken it, and over time make the stigma go away, right? And so one of the things that she says is that if you're interested, and this would be more for those who are, your sociological signs. If you want to understand processes of growing recognition, you also need to look at destigmatization. And the kinds of things you could think about is to learn and to honor, to really learn from, and look closely at processes of collective destigmatization. Not just individuals learning to address whatever shame they have from something they've done or some category that is stigmatized, but collective processes of destigmatization. One of the things that she's looked at is how gay men and their allies destigmatized HIV. Early on in the HIV crisis, they were people who had HIV were looked at as pariahs and immoral and that kind of thing. And there was a collective process of destigmatizing HIV that involved a variety of people, including activist groups and allies in the medical field. You can, if you want to look it up, you could look it up. Other questions you might ask: how do African Americans counter stigma and stereotypes? This is another thing that she has studied. And she didn't look just at African Americans, at black people in the United States. She then looked at how they do it a little differently in Brazil, right? She's saying we really need to look at this and learn from it as part of this project of increasing social recognition. How do poor white people counter stereotypes? Stereotypes like white trash or trailer trash. There's a whole collective process of how they've turned those things around and how they've fought back against them, but also then, come to embrace their culture. Um, how are Haitian immigrants today in Springfield, Ohio, countering the stereotypes that they've faced? What have they done? How have they protected themselves and worked against those stigmatizing stereotypes? How do evangelical Christians counter stereotypes? How are transgender people today countering the stereotypes that they faced with all the advertising and the stigma that went along with that? These are all really important questions if you're interested in broadening social recognition and achieving that kind of ordinary universalism that she was talking about. So you're going to be reading a chapter where Lamont talks about how Gen Z fits into all of this. She bases this chapter that you're reading on interviews of 80 college students, half of which are first generation. So that's how she gets some class diversity. She's well aware that by looking only at college students, she's leaving out Gen Zers who don't go to college. That's who she's actually currently studying now with a couple of colleagues. But nevertheless, she wants us to, she's gone ahead and she's written about the in-depth interviews that she has done. These are qualitative, semi-structured interviews that she's done with Gen Zers that are college students. One of the most striking things that she and her colleagues found was that Gen Z focuses on recognition, that's kind of, a central part of their of the Gen Z generation, and that the title "Seeing Others" she kind of borrows from from Gen Z, the focus on being seen, being recognized. She concludes that many Gen Zers actually want to replace that American dream I was talking about, that that is kind of a neoliberal American dream that's gotten narrowed down by neoliberalism, with a dream of inclusion. So they're working to develop a new collective imaginary that is inclusive of all people. So this is, this very much fits with her idea of recognition. And so in that sense, she sees Gen Z as potentially, we don't know, but potentially at the forefront of a greater focus on recognition. Doesn't mean that there won't be any interest in redistribution, but she thinks that they're going to leave their mark on our society in part through a shifting emphasis that includes a greater focus on recognition. And so that's the kind of the short version. So you see how she describes it. Now, she's not saying that all Gen Zers, are only focused on inclusion, right? But I do want you to notice, for example, how as you're reading, how many Gen Zers does she say are anti-materialistic, and how many say that growing inequality goes against their goal of greater social solidarity. And how many are skeptical of the American dream, and why are they skeptical? Uh, those are things I want you to, I hope you'll notice and think about. A couple of other things, so that I don't give you too much of a Pollyannish, description of Gen Z, is that she does, she does point out and notice that a lot of Gen Zers are focusing on individual achievement and hard work and being competitive and having grit and that kind of thing. But even there, she says it's often less for achieving the conventional American dream, to get social status by being successful, and more, even when it's, quite individualistic in a way, it's more for self-development and self-actualization to become their best selves, and less, less rooted in, uh, um, in social, the kind of social status you get through through being one of the winners in the achievement, individual achievement game. So it's a little more self-directed, she thinks, the what they're searching for. Um, she also talks about how many of them, many Gen Zers, focus a lot on self-actualization, and she sees this as understandable given how big our therapeutic culture is. People who look and compare our culture to other ones and how we were in the past do point out that we have a big focus on a therapeutic culture of self-actualization that includes ideals and ideas of being well-rounded, discovering your true authentic self. Personal fulfillment is where you get meaning. Living your passion, or following your passion. These kinds of ideas fit this culture of self-actualization that many Gen Zers have. And I think that she thinks that this again can be an alternative to that sort of achievement treadmill, and it is an alternative to the achievement treadmill. So it is kind of a stepping away from aspects of that American dream, but it can also, I think she also sees it, and she wants us to consider, and possibly Gen Zers to consider, that it may also be very individualistic and sort of privatized, and can be part of a retreat from building greater social solidarity and greater equality as well. So that's it for this week. I do hope you ask questions as you're reading. One of the reasons why I wanted to give so much background is because I do think that the chapter, although I think it's pretty straightforward in how you can read it, there's a lot there and there's a lot to think about. And so I encourage you to ask questions as you come along, as you're going through it. Have a great week.